Now, I want to, before I go on to the temporalität, which I'm going to keep calling temporalität because I can't, which is the German, because I can't keep calling it temporality with a capital T. That's too much of a mouthful. They're two totally different German words. Zeitlichkeit gets translated temporality in here, and temporalität gets translated temporality with a capital T. We'll just have to fix that. But I did find one thing I want to do is to go back before we go on to something I found in an essay that Heidegger wrote in 1925, in which he talks about time and realism in science. I don't know if I ever showed this to you. Have I? I've seen it, so I copied it because it's so relevant to what we've been talking about. Oh, that's interesting. Give me back one. I didn't bring it with me, the book, but I don't need the book. So, but I'll wait till you get it, and I'll just fill you in the background of where we are. So, starting with the top of 171, there's a sentence that's cut off, but it isn't important. It starts where we want to start. Philosophy is observation of the world, disclosing it in terms of its being. Here, the real being of the world is nature. This is going to turn out to be not what Heidegger's doing, but we have to read it. The real being of the world is nature, as that which always is. A science of the world is in the first place, therefore, an unlocking of nature. And that's still, that the Greeks could do that. Nature has to be made present and accessible in its perceptual being and regularity in such a way that all those moments are excluded, which now comes the important part. This is how we deal with nature. Nature, well, let me think a minute. Just a second. No, that's still, the Greeks already are getting a view of nature which leaves us out of it. So let me go on. Nature has to be made present and accessible in its perpetual, continuous being and regularity in such a way that all of those moments are excluded, which, through conditioning our access to the observation of nature, interfere with it. So already in Plato, for instance, you get the idea that you want to contemplate it in pure theory and not involving perception in your body. This tendency first developed in such a way that rather than erecting a name to particular laws, it secured fundamental concepts. This happened in Greek philosophy. So they've got their own view of nature, but that's not what we're interested in. But the next sentence, which is important. Modern physics, and this is, remember what I'm trying to argue so you can listen in the right way. I want to say this is going to cast light on Heidegger's claim that there are time-free movements of nature and that we can have access to them, and our access can be totally contingent, that is, in no way affect these laws. That's what I claim he should say if he's going to be a realist about science, and he does say it here. He says, modern physics led to the discovery of laws of motion, defining them in a way that was free of any reference to the contingencies of our access, measurement, and defining of them. That's exactly the point. And then he thinks the theory of relativity, far from making the laws of nature or the laws describing the time-free movements of nature relative to us, relativity determines what counts as absolute motion. So the theory of relativity took seriously this idea of an absolute knowledge of nature. It's not a theory about the relative validity of physical laws. Rather, it inquires to those conditions of definition and measurement that make it possible for nature to be grasped purely in terms of itself. That is, that's what I keep wanting to talk about. He wants to talk about the electrons, or in this case, space and time, as they are in themselves, purely in terms of itself, and for its laws of motion to be understood. That's all I want to read. So the laws of motion are going to be these time-free descriptions of change, but it's going to be change without respect to us, without respect to now. There's no now in the laws describing the movements of nature, and it won't have in it earlier and later. Now, there's a place in here which I marked in my copy, which I left behind on one of these pages, where, but I want to talk about this, not in class, but you might notice it if you read it. He talks about science. I wonder if we can skim it. Talks about science describing things in terms of the earlier and the later. And I would have hoped that he would have talked about it in terms of the before and after. Let's skim it down for earlier and later. I tried to find the German. What? Really? That's nice. Where is that? I see. But you got there without any earlier and later? It may be that it's not on one of these 2 pages. I'll talk to you about it later. Anyway, I'm trying to track down the German. It would be what? Vorher and nachher would be one possibility, and then that could be translated earlier and later, but could also be translated before and after. Where's the before and after now? In the last paragraph? Okay. It says there starts what is counted in motion with respect to before and after. Yes, that's the whole discussion of Aristotle that we've got in the basic problems too. That's on the right track, Heidegger thinks. But somewhere, here it is, got it, middle paragraph. Thus time, even thought of as I'm at the beginning of the middle paragraph. Thus time, even thought of as the time of nature, does not have to be conceived of in an absolute metaphysical fashion. This is one of the basic discoveries of the theory of relativity. Physical time is one-dimensional, irreversible multiplicity of earlier and later moments. That worries me. I really looked all over German Amazon trying to find the original paper that the footnote tells this is from. But each now is unrepeatable and so forth. We just have to look into that. But in general, I mean, if that says earlier and later, then that's important to worry about. Because if he really says earlier and later there, then I'm stumped, or he's confused. And this is 2 years before being in time, but I just don't believe he's going to say that. He knows already, presumably, that earlier and later are relative to a now, and now is something that we bring to the time-free movements. I can't believe that he said that. But if this weren't the last lecture I give, in fact, I'll tell you, I've got your email addresses. If he really did say that, I'll send you an email telling you we're back to square one, and that's the best I can do. Let's hope I don't have to. Okay, anybody want to say anything about that? I mean, of all people, I think Jamie might want to, because he just wrote his honors thesis on this issue. Do you think this is a problem for the? He has the interesting thesis that Heidegger is not interested in itself, sort of the metaphysics. He's not a metaphysical realist about anything, not even about the things science studies. And his thesis convinced me that Heidegger doesn't care much. You'll notice it goes by in 2 sentences. He doesn't care much about whether we've got access to the necessary laws of the laws of motion that make our practices for gaining access to them, namely doing science and so forth, contingent, that is, irrelevant to these time-free motions by way of these practices. Heidegger does, I think, believe it, but James convinced me that Heidegger doesn't care much, that it only gets mentioned for 1 page in Being and Time, and in this article only for a few sentences. But I do think it looks like he's talking like a realist about science, at least for a sentence. We could talk about it later. Yeah, okay, because by now it's a big issue after I've written. We can't answer. 1 sentence is not going to overthrow your view, I'm sure. Okay, so now then we're going to go to the Temporalität. I brought along the German for that, though I have nothing in mind in case something like that earlier or later comes up where this time I will be able to at least settle it. Okay, let me just explain before I even start trying to lecture on this. It's really providing me and sort of forcing me to realize how I approach something that is so difficult and so abstract as these pages about Temporalität and about présence and so forth, that they are really dense and hard to understand. I don't know how you feel about it. How many had a chance to read what you were supposed to be reading? Not so many. Well, then I'll read passages that will help you understand. And part of what I want to talk about, I didn't assign. And I realize now that I should have, only then I look out at your hands and I realize now it doesn't matter whether I did or not. You've got other jobs to worry about. But I'll read passages both from what you should have been reading after page 305 or something. 302 is where I'm going to go to. But there's stuff between where we stopped and 302, which is important to read. But here, my method, and this is and you have to help me with this, or learn that this is the right way to do it, or not the best way to do it. I don't think there's any right way. The best way to interpret Heidegger, but I'm always saying, and at least I have Heidegger on my side sometimes, say it's the phenomena that you've got to get in mind. You can't understand these strange abstract terms, and without the phenomena, you're just throwing them around, as there is a whole school of Heideggerians who specialize all their lives in throwing around these fancy terms, who think that his book Contributions to Philosophy, which has more fancy terms thrown around in more ways, is his greatest work, even greater than Being in Time. But I'm trying hard to understand this by thinking of what it is he might be talking about when he's doing it. And hopefully, if I get it right, that's going to be helpful to understand why he says what he says. And on the other, and if it does help us understand what he says while he says, that's good evidence that this interpretation is getting it right, or at least is a good interpretation. So, I can't just jump in and list all the phenomena at once. They will come by one in what I want to say in, say, the next half hour. So let's start on 274. Those of you who have, lots of you have basic problems now, or more of you anyway. This isn't in the part that Tyler Xeroxed, I don't think, because it wasn't on the syllabus. But, so those who have it, have it. And so on 274, there's this really dense paragraph, which I think resonates with a paragraph in Being in Time, and because I think that what he's talking about. No, let me read it first, and then I'll tell. No, then you have to listen differently. I think that what he's talking about, the phenomena there, is familiarity as the background upon which all of our understanding of ourselves and entities take place. And after I read it, I'll show you the place in Being in Time where he says very similar things, and he says that he's talking about familiarity. That would be nice. That would be a phenomenon. We know what familiarity is. He's given us a good example in Being in Time of a room. So anyway, here we are. I'm going to read on 274 the end of the last paragraph of section 19, starting in the italics. Temporality, remember that's Zeitlichkeit. That means the temporal structure of Dasein, Zeitlichkeit. It's this ecstatical way of being that we are. Temporality is the condition of the possibility of the constitution of Dasein's being. Remember, in the language of Being in Time, temporality is the meaning of care. Care is the meaning of Dasein's being. However, to this constitution, there belongs understanding of being. For the Dasein, as existent, comports itself towards beings which are not Daseins, and beings which are. Accordingly, temporality must also be, and this is going to be very important to get clear about, must also be the condition of the possibility of the understanding of being that belongs to Dasein. Getting the phenomena right, or is tied up with hearing that phrase, the conditions of possibility, right. When we talk about the condition of the possibility of the understanding of being, the distinction between Blattner's approach, which is going to lead Heidegger into idealism, and my approach, which makes it at least incompatible with realism, turns on, or will make a big difference how you understand that. But right now I'm just going to read it. Accordingly, temporality must also be the condition of the possibility of the understanding of being that belongs to Dasein. How does temporality make such understanding of being possible? How is time as temporality the horizon for the explicit understanding of being as such? If being is supposed to be the theme of the science of ontology or of scientific philosophy, sort of, you need to be able to theorize about it. In its role as conditions of the possibility of the understanding of being, both pre-ontological and ontological, we'll call temporality, let's try that again. In its role as a condition of the possibility of the understanding of being, both pre-ontological and ontological, we shall call temporality, temporalitate. So temporality, which is a structure of Dasein, when it's the structure that makes possible, in some sense, the understanding of being, we're going to call it, and therefore is the basis of doing, is pre-ontological, because it's got in it an understanding of being, and it's the basis of doing ontology. We're going to call that temporalitate. Now that is pretty obscure, and I'm reading into it the only something, at least, which I can make sense of, and happily, this is a better example than anything else I'm going to say in the lecture. It looks like there is a phenomenon that he's talking about on 119 of Being and Time, which is just what this paragraph is talking about in a much more abstract way. And so I'm going to read it, that last paragraph. That wherein Dasein already understands itself is always something with which it is primordially familiar. So I'm going to claim that familiarity is the phenomenon, and that's on the basis of which we relate to entities. This familiarity with the world does not necessarily require that the relations which are constituted for the world as world should be theoretically transparent. However, the possibility of giving these relations an explicit ontological existential interpretation is grounded in this familiarity. So it looks to me like the giving an ontological interpretation is what this paragraph is about, and this grounding in familiarity is the conditions of what he calls here the conditions of the possibility of the understanding of being. Let me go on. And this familiarity, in turn, is constitutive for Dasein and goes to make up Dasein's understanding of being. So there you see, it's temporality turns out to be the conditions of the possibility of the understanding of being in basic problems. Here, I think familiarity is the same thing. It's doing the same job. It makes up Dasein's understanding of being. This possibility is one which can be seized upon explicitly insofar as Dasein sets itself the task of giving a primordial interpretation of its own being and the possibilities of that being, or indeed for the meaning of being in general. That's ontology. So somehow the familiarity makes up Dasein's understanding of being, and therefore if you do a study of it, you do ontology. You could, when you push it all through, as he does, trying to do he doesn't do it, but he could do the past, present, and future the way he'll do the present, and he will, in principle, if you get the understanding of being, then you get the understanding of all the modes of being. I've said this before, I say it every once in a while to keep my own sanity. Then you would get the understanding of being ready to hand, being present at hand, being Dasein, and you would have a general ontology, except there are even more basic issues, which is what we're going to come to. I mean, you'd have the first stage of doing ontology. Then you need to explain something about what makes that ontology possible. We're not ready for that yet. But what he calls here conditions of the possibility of the understanding of being, I think, is familiarity. And why is that important? Well, because if you hear conditions of possibility in a Kantian way, which you would and should. I mean, it's Kant's phrase. Then it looks like it's a Blattner claim that there is some kind of structure, which Heidegger is getting at, which is what ontology wants to describe, and which makes possible our experience of objects and of equipment and others. It's going to turn out, of course, it has to do the same job, make our encountering all sorts of beings possible. But there are two ways you could make our encountering all sorts of being possible. One would be to have a kind of categorical structure which makes determinate, as Bill says, all the various modes of being. And that's the easy thing to say. That's what you would say if you were reading Kant, as Blattner has for years, ever since he was an undergraduate here, and reading it into Heidegger. But it would be a radical different thing to say that the condition of possibility really means that phenomenon on the basis of which you are able to have all the modes of being or all the forms of intentionality, as he'll put it later. And it's a big difference because that's not a structure. Familiarity is not a structure. Familiarity is a very, very basic phenomenon. And it's only on the basis of familiarity, with rooms, for instance, that we can encounter chairs. But that's not like saying the familiarity is a kind of structure which structures objects or equipment, say, like chairs and floors and walls and windows. You see what I mean? And I think it's going to turn out. And so if it's hard to know what the phenomena is he's talking about on 274, but it must be the same as 119. I hope I've at least convinced you of that. I mean, it does the same job. He uses the same words. It's all about finding out about the understanding of being. So but it comes right after the discussion of the phenomenon of world. And I think that it's part of what's going on is he's describing a certain aspect of the phenomenon of world, namely that it's familiar and it's the condition of the possibility of encountering anything. So my first idea, Tyler, good. Okay, well, I think of a structure as conceptual. I mean, in Kant, at least the structure is conceptual. But go ahead. And I think of the structure as somehow abstractable from what it's structured. For familiarity is he says that it's in basic problems. I'm going to come to it later, but he says it's pre-objective, pre-conceptual, and there's the third pre. And pre-ontological, whatever it is that this. Can you say that about a structure? Yes, if something does, then does. I would have thought I thought that was on my side. I don't think one does a structure.
Well, you can think yellow, which are, but there's all sorts of things. You have a phenomenon which it doesn't have. Which isn't the bottom structure that it does. None. The familiarity must be a temporal structure, but it's not a phenomenon that.
I got to think about this. I mean, an existential is a structure because it's the abstraction from the existential. I don't see that familiarity is like that. I mean, familiarity doesn't seem to be an existential. It seems to be a phenomenon. It does. It involves certainly an activity, a temporalizing activity, some pressing into possibilities and thrown into moods. But those aren't structures either, it seems to me. Those are more phenomena. Maybe we're not arguing about anything. I don't know. But it seems that when Blattner hears, remember the definition of being in Being and Time. It's got this half a sentence of Dreyfus and half a sentence of Blattner. Being is that on the basis of which beings are already understood. That's my version. That's familiarity, for instance. And then, comma, that which determines beings as determined seems so strange. I mean, I don't see that on the basis of which beings are already understood familiarity determines being as being. Determines is a Kantian notion. It's that there are these conceptual structures which literally structure the phenomenon. You're looking worried, both of you, so there's probably something nothing very serious to worry about.
But it must be a perspective.
Maybe there's a non-issue here. What do you think? You're looking like you want to say something. Eugene, do you? You're not seeing a difference either. Huh. That's a problem. What's that? There's no familiarity is certainly not a chaos. It's got a lot of, you could say, structure, but it's not. But it's not. I mean, does it matter that whether the structure is conceptual, abstractable, and so forth? I mean, familiarity's kind of structure is a kind of structure which you can't abstract from the room. If it's a familiarity with a room, it's certainly not conceptual. Now, maybe Blattner's a straw man. Kant certainly has a structure. We aren't disagreeing about that, are we? That's separable from what its structures and conceptual and so forth. So it's just a question of whether Blattner, when he says that it's a structure which determines, I guess there's another way to put it, and then I sort of give up. The Vorauf hin, which is this crucial word that we're worrying about, which I take to be on the basis of which maybe it helps to say, which I hear as the background, of the holistic background of coping practices. Blattner always says in his book, in terms of which. As soon as you go to in terms of which, it sounds much more conceptual. You say, it's that in terms of which we determine entities as entities. Boy, that's a funny way of describing it seems to me, the practices which form the background of the holistic practices which form the background of our specific intentional practices. You don't hear a difference, or you think I'm making it up, I take it?
I think Blattner's on something like activity on the side of Dasein, which is the ultimate basis.
And the structure will be this threefold temporal structure. Well, what if I just took out the word and said it's activities on the basis of which? What does it add? Either it seems to me it adds nothing to say structure, or it adds something I don't want. Okay, good. Okay, it's based in, maybe that's the way to get the two views together. It's based on practices in the background, Dasein practices in the background. It's based upon them. That we can articulate and talk about. That's true, because he says you can make it the basis of an ontology. So I guess all that's left of my view is I want to make sure that we don't just start at the second level, where we've got something that we've already articulated and are now making an ontology, that at the very most basic level, it's a holistic bunch of activities that can be articulated. That's all right. Maybe both of you want to say that. Maybe Bill wants to say that, because he does talk a lot about practices. Yeah.
When you're talking about the question as well, when do we stop auditing structures or horizons? But in this reading we did today, it seems like he answered that question. Because temporality is self-projection.
Self-what? Self-projection.
You think of it as...
That's right. You think of a projection, sort of thinking like projecting a picture on the wall. And that's right. Don't think of projecting your particular activities into future events. And it's true now that temporality is what now? Projection of Dasein's activity on, okay, let me look at, wait, I get to 307. Yeah, I'll put this way, I want to put this away. And I want to look to see if what's happening here, just so how discouraged to be. It's still working. Okay, 307. There we are.
In the middle of the page, the second paragraph, let's say, looking backwards, we can say that temporality is intrinsically.
Okay, good. Let's go on. So whatever and whenever understanding exists, we are here disregarding the other moments of the Dasein. This understanding is possible only in temporality self-projection. Dasein exists, it's unveiled because it makes possible the Da and its unveiledness in general. Well, what do you get out of that?
Well, I guess that alone is damage. But then he says, first thing on the next paragraph, temporality is self-projection, simply starts with the condition of the possibility of all projecting. This one implies that temporality is some that's already concomitantly unveiled in all factual projection. So, and then to fast forward a little bit, more third one before the other, understanding of beings, projection upon being, understanding of being.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. That's a hard place. But where are you? We all ought to be looking at that. Where? Okay. I mean, that's way ahead of where we are. But let's see if we can deal with it. If we define temporality as the original constitution of Dasein, and thus as the origin of the possibility of the understanding of being, let's talk about that for a minute. The origin of the possibility of the understanding. So Dasein's constitution, namely taking a stand on its own being, is the origin of the possibility of the understanding of being, where the understanding of being is, I think, the background coping practices, and that's all right then. Okay, so Dasein takes a stand on its being through doing all these specific things on the basis of some background familiarity. Okay, then temporality, that's his temporalitate, then temporalitate as origin is necessarily richer and more pregnant than anything that may arise from it. We have to get here step by step, because it's not obvious at all what temporalitate is ever, but certainly not here. I'll try a little further to myself. No, let's wait. We have to wait to get there, because it's so hard. And then he gets the summing up paragraphs to condense it all into making it even harder. You look like you want to say one more thing.
Temporality.
Does what? That's right. Temporalitate is where the buck stops in these levels. So the temporalitate is it's a rich something. Says, I don't think of the word structure. What is it? It was right where you were reading a minute ago. Where were we on 3.9, 3.8? You rich. Temporalitate is richer and more pregnant than anything may arise from it. So I'm going to argue or try to show or claim or something that you've got to take apart this rich temporalitate into several different phenomena, which he gets to be distinguishing as he goes through here. But I can't say yet what. And maybe we'll agree then. I mean, and when you put all these phenomena together, you get temporalitate, and temporalitate is that somehow activity of Dasein that makes the understanding of being possible, which in turn makes the encountering of particular beings possible. And why we get these two levels of possibility and no less and no more is very hard to understand, but he tries to explain it. Okay. Anybody else? Tyler, more, yeah. Well, that's surely one of the things we'd better do in here. Yeah.
Temporality is self-projection.
Yeah.
It be black and gray. It's contradiction. When I hear you talk about phenomena, I hear you trying to stop the.
Okay. I have in mind what I have to check this on what I have in mind. In fact, I don't think the richness of temporalitate is an activity. It's sort of aspects of an activity or sort of put together. Well, let me try it the other way. What activity is it that you think it's an activity? But that looks like that's the Zeitlichkeit with its ecstasies and horizons.
It's activity done like.
Then it looked like, let's just review, it looked like the bottom line in ontology was the Dasein, as a being that takes a stand on its being, has the threefold ecstasies of the past, present, and future in their non-sequential form, and that each of those has a horizon, that is, something in the world corresponds to each of those things in Dasein in a way that they can't be separated. That was the bottom line. That's what we agree at a non-cognitive Kantian. It's funny that it happens, and I noticed this time reading through, sometimes it looks like it is sort of correlative structure between the ecstatic structure, which is due to Dasein, and the horizontal structure, which is due to the world. And it looks like every ecstasy has a horizon, and sometimes it looks like the ecstasy sort of reaches out to a horizon, and sometimes it looks like it makes the horizon, because sometimes he's always taking the horizon back to the ecstasy. You've noticed that too. Right, I agree. Good, absolutely. And then it wouldn't be conscious. No, but you're on the right track, and it's not. The difference between an activity of Dasein and the phenomena. I mean, the activity is also a phenomenon, I think. But there are phenomena that are not activities of Dasein, but are correlative with activities of Dasein. That would be the non-Kantian side. That would be the side that makes the horizon equally important to the ecstasy. And sometimes he does talk that way, and sometimes just when I'm thinking, oh boy, he's got it, he goes back to say it all goes back to Dasein's ecstasies, which just happen to have horizons. But the ecstasies and Dasein are more basic than the horizons. And then it sounds Kantian. And if you have a Kantian thing which doesn't have any more a conceptual structure, but has a kind of activity that goes back to the basic way being that we are. It's so why he doesn't see or want to say that one of our activities is certainly taking a stand on ourselves, and that gives us the three ecstasies. But it couldn't do it if it weren't linking up with the world. That was the horizons. I know you don't mind that. That's you want to be a realist of some sort about it and not have it turn into Kant. We're going to go back over it. I've got candidates for what on the world side can't be absorbed into activities of Dasein, which really belong on the side of the horizons. I'll tell you, I don't want to keep them up my sleeve. I think he's getting at very, very deep and fundamental phenomena, and I think one of them is affordances, that there has to be solicitations in the world to which Dasein is responding in its activity. That would be way down in a kind of ontic level, but there on some abstract level, there has to be, or abstract's probably not the right word, on an ontological level, there's where we're talking about the background instead of talking about dealing with particular objects. There still are, I think, something like affordances. And the other thing I think that he's got is that, well, that's the main one. The other one may be on the side of Dasein. It seems when he's talking about the unready to hand and how you recognize something that's missing, he's got a view about the readiness of Dasein to cope with things or to find its way around in the world. And the readiness is another something. But the readiness is on the side of Dasein. But I guess on the side, and like the ecstasies. And I'm trying to find out what in the world he thinks, if anything, and I think he does seem to think, is over on the horizon side, namely world. Of course, self and world can't be separated. And of course, it's all being in the world. But it looks like, for him, being in the world is finally really Dasein. Dasein is being in the world. And somehow the world gets played down, and the being that takes a stand on its being, Dasein, gets made absolutely basic, more basic. That's what I wish he wouldn't do. Of course, maybe he does it even though I wish he wouldn't. And maybe he does it even though later he wished he hadn't. I mean, this is tied up with, presumably, why he doesn't go on with being in time, that he's falling into giving a kind of priority to Dasein and doing what he calls fundamental ontology, which is tracing it all back to the fact that there's a being that takes the stand on its being. And later he'll say that he gave up being in time because he was falling into the ruts of the tree. Anyway, let me do it step by step, keeping our eye on the ball as best we can. To what extent, why does he need to bring in temporalitate at all? if it isn't that he's trying to get the world and Dasein balanced and the ecstasies and the horizon into phenomenon or a structure, probably a phenomenon that has a structure to keep track of both of us. So he's trying to find a phenomenon that has a structure that is more basic than the structure of Dasein with its ecstasies correlated with horizon. And that structure is temporality Tate. So let's go on and see if we can do it. I mean, this is so hard. I mean, if you can't follow what's going on, I don't know whether it's my. If it's my fault, I'm sorry. But everybody's got to help to try to make it clear. I don't think I can do it alone. But let's see where we get. Where were we on? I was reading 276 way back there. I have to catch up or go back, and I think I read. So there's a lot about understanding there on 276 as coping, of course. So and it's in the context of talking about the understanding of being, because the understanding of being is the most basic background coping. I think that's what I think Being in Time says, and that's what I think this says on 274. But he says it much more obscurely. And the understanding at the bottom of 276. If understanding is a basic determination of existence, as such it is the condition of the possibility for all of Dasein's particular possible manners of comportment. It is the condition of the possibility for all kinds of comportment, not only practical but cognitive, and so forth. Now, that can cut both ways. I mean, that certainly grounds or the understanding of being, and it makes the understanding of being a kind of coping. But it makes it all, we're on the side of Dasein, because it's Dasein that's got this understanding of being. So if he's going to get it out of falling into Dasein, he's got to do something else with it. And then I wanted to go on to 279. Well, something that I think is important, though it may turn out not to be. But on 279, I want to read it. This is called the chapter or the section called Existential Understanding of Being and Projection of Being. It's still got to do with the relation of the background coping to having an understanding. Now, the Dasein is being in the world, and in equal originality with its facticity, a world is disclosed, and other Daseins are disclosed, and interworldly beings like us are disclosed. The Dasein understands in equal originality the understanding of existence, the existence of Dasein, and interworldly beings, all of those. At first, however, now comes the part I want to read. At first, however, the understanding of being, Dasein, and of things extant in here is present at hand in the other. So let's read again. The understanding of being of Dasein and of things that are present at hand is not divided and articulated into specific modes of being, and it is not comprehended as such. Existence, being existent, or that's existence is Dasein. Being extant, that is, being present at hand, being handy, that is, the ready to hand. He's listing all the modes of being. These are not conceptually comprehended, each in its own sense of being, but they are understood indifferently in an understanding of being that makes possible and guides the experience of nature and the self-apprehension of the history. So what I want to say is, if this is again this sort of background finding your way around in the world, which is something which is not separated out, but is which makes possible in the sense of guides our experience of everything. I think all of this is very similar to Being in Time, and I don't think we need to read it. It's because it's all doing. He's explaining the understanding of being, which is fine, but it's the temporality Tate, which is one level more basic, that we want to get to. So I'm not going to read that. I'm going to go to 289. Okay, yes, here's one of these places where it looks like the world gets priority on 289, the bottom paragraph. We understand ourselves by way of things in the sense of the self-understanding of everyday Dasein. To understand ourselves from the things with which we are occupied means to project our own ability to be upon such features of the business of our everyday occupation as the feasible, urgent, indispensable, expedient. Now that looks like it comes back to us. The Dasein understands itself from the ability to be that is determined by the success and failures of commerce with things. The Dasein thus comes toward itself, this is where it looks like the other side, from out of the things. It expects its own can-be as the can-be of a being that relies on what things give or what they refuse. That sounds more like these affordances. It is as though the Dasein's can-be were projected by the things, by Dasein's commerce with them, and not primarily by the Dasein itself from its own peculiar self, which exists and is always dealing with things. Now, I don't know how and why that sounds right, and that seems like it makes it equal the way things in Dasein contribute. I suppose you like that, Tyler, then. That seems to be giving more credit to the things than usual. I think that's, but I don't know but that keeps getting taken back in such a way that I'm not sure that it's doing a big deal job. It may be just existential, is what this section is about. But I'd like to use it to say what I wanted to say. So then I was going to read Being in Time 119, which I read a long time ago, and show you, but nobody doubts it, that what Heidegger's talking about, he calls, but it's just in case you want to look it up, 281 and 282, he talks about the pre-objective, pre-conceptual, and pre-ontological. That's what he's been talking about. And he talks about openness, functionality, contexture, significance, and worldhood, openness, and transcendence. Those are all important ways of describing the fact that Dasein is open to and encounters entities. They all seem to me, this is on 299, they all seem to me to be put together in familiarity. The whole list is on 299, where he says, about 20 lines down, equipment and the ready to hand confront us in the horizon of an understood world. Now, it's coming from the side of the world there. If it's horizon, it's always the side of the world. Equipment in the handy confront us in the horizon of an understood world. They are encountered always as interworldly beings. World is understood beforehand when objects are encountered. I wanted to start one sentence before that. In dealing with ready-to-hand equipment, Dasein already understands functionality. That the Dasein returns to beings of that sort only from its antecedent understanding of functionality, contexture, significance, and world. Being must stand in the light of understood functionality, and so forth. Well, I think that familiarity is a rich notion which needs all of that. All of that is in familiarity. The functionality, the holism, the significance, and worldhood. And that's fine. I mean, I don't think that's controversial. It's just that in Being in Time, he just dumps them all into familiarity, and here he sort of spreads them out. I don't have anything to say about that. And then comes these fast 2 paragraphs at the end, just when it looks like he might as well be talking about familiarity, and he's already done it, and he says so on 301, the end of the top long paragraph. We call the unity of these relations the Dasein's being in, with the sense that the Dasein possesses an original familiarity with itself and with others, with entities and extant. This familiarity is, as such, familiarity in a world. That's the same claim as in 119 in Being in Time. So you can put them all together and call it familiarity. And now comes these fast paragraphs where it turns out that familiarity gets spelled out. It doesn't seem to be basic. It seems to be spelled out further in where shall I read it? In the structural Now we're back to the ecstatic, the Zeitlichkeit, and that is the temporality and the Temporalität structure for the last paragraph, where he seems to be getting, I presume, thinks he's getting at something that explains or makes intelligible familiarity and all these other things he's been talking about. But I'm going to read some of it. The ecstatic character of time makes possible the Dasein's specific overstepping character, transcendence, and thus also the world. So notice there it's the ecstatic character, and you don't even hear about horizons. But of course, soon you'll hear that each one has a horizon, and that seems like a good idea. So a little further, as removals too, and that's because of the ecstatic character of each of them, they have a horizon which is prescribed by the mode of the removal. And removal is a funny term. It means that you're putting something at a distance. The ecstasies go out to something that is Dasein, which is something in the world. The carrying away the mode of the future, past, and present, which belongs to the ecstasies themselves. Each ecstasis, as a removal to, has at the same time within itself, which is odd, because I would like to think that it has it outside itself, but has within itself and belonging to it is a predelineation of the formal structure of the whereto of the removal. We call this wither of the ecstasies the horizon, or the horizontal schema of the ecstasy. This is all extremely dense, but it seems extremely going in the Kantian wrong direction. It keeps getting, ecstasies are what's important. And then inside these ecstasies, or implied by them or something, is the world. Each ecstasy has within itself a complete determinate schema, which modifies itself in accordance with the manner in which the temporality temporalizes itself, the manner in which the ecstasies modify themselves. Just as the ecstasies intrinsically constitute the unity of temporality, so in each case there corresponds to the ecstatic unity of temporality, a unity of the horizontal schema. Well, that's giving them equal, which is where they should be, it would seem. And then, in italics, the transcendence of being in the world means that there's an opening in which there can be intentionality, there can be encountering of entity. That world is more basic than, or makes possible, the encountering. The transcendence of being in the world is founded in its specific wholeness on the original ecstatic horizontal unity of temporality. So that's still temporality. Now comes the next section where it gets harder. Temporalität. So the title of the next section is and that's where you start. Temporality, temporalität, and being. So it says the task now is to comprehend how, on the basis of temporality that grounds Dasein's transcendence, the Dasein's temporality makes possible the understanding of the Dasein's Temporalität makes possible the understanding of being. So far we've seen that temporality with a lower t makes possible the understanding of being. But now Temporalität makes possible the understanding of being. What's going on? Why do we say it that way? Let me read it again. On the basis of temporality that grounds the Dasein's temporalität makes possible. So it's somehow the temporalität is going to make possible the temporality that makes possible an understanding of being, I guess. And we ought to be able to do ontology right off, you mean? Yeah, I exactly had the same feeling. I hope somebody would. It seems like there's a one level too many of explanation. That we've already got to the basis, on the basis of which every kind of intentionality is possible. Everything that shows up can show up. There's a clearing, namely in which they show up, transcendence. And now, what in the world if we want more? I want you guys to help me. Yeah.
But that sounds like you're saying temporalität is on the basis of.
Ooh, that would be very, very bad. Does he say that? Where's that? The first sentence? The task now is to comprehend how, on the basis of temporality that grounds the Dasein's transcendence, the Dasein's Zeitlichkeit makes possible the understanding of being. So that is really weird. Yes, on the basis of... Yeah, go ahead.
What we're called temporalizing of temporality is temporalität. Sounds like
I want to give you the German because that first sentence is so strange. That can you pass this back to Eugene? The first sentence is so strange that maybe it's wrong. That would help because I don't understand how, on the basis of the temporality that grounds the Dasein's transcendence, which was just what we've been hearing about for the last 20 pages, the Dasein's temporality makes possible the understanding of being. That is an incomprehensible sentence. That's what it says. Okay, well, I don't have any idea what that means. On the basis of Dasein has an understanding of being. Yes, and now comes then, how does temporality come in?
Both ones have to be a condition prior.
It seems to be on the basis of temporality that temporality does its job. How can it be prior? That's just the Eugene question. How can it both be prior to it and do it? I mean, how can temporality be the basis of the understanding of being, also the basis of temporality? Is that what I get lost?
When you have temporality,
which is already the condition.
You already got the story about how Dasein understands being specific. Now there's more to that story. Talk about
you look like maybe the German's helping or something.
This first starts to sound like he's saying, "Where are you with it?"
Boy.
Definitely,
And we can't say that he didn't have time to write this book. I mean, it would be easy if this was Division 2 of being in time. We could just say, poor Heidegger, they just didn't have time to finish the manuscript. But he had plenty of time to finish the manuscript. It took him about 50 years before this was published. I mean, this didn't get published right away. This is a course he gave. He could revise it and do whatever he wanted. Anyway, so he must mean what he says there, but I don't know what it is. So let's go on. Maybe it'll get clearer. It didn't get much clearer to me, I'm afraid. So where are we? On 301, we got there. Okay, so now, adding originary, here's my version of it. Adding that this originary temporality brings back the threefold character of Dasein's temporality and the correlative temporality of the world, and claiming that this ecstatic horizontal temporality is even more basic than familiarity. Oh, that's all right. That he's been doing. That the horizontal temporality explains even familiarity. We can do that. But what it looks like this other stuff that's coming in here about not temporality, which is fine. Remember, that's the name for the way Dasein becomes a clearing or an opening in which you can. Now we've got this new story that we need something else, namely temporality, and that's what we're trying to understand. Does it help to read the third sentence? I suppose not, but I'll read anyway. In connection with it, that is, temporality, we have always already oriented our considerations toward the question of the possibility of specific understanding of being, namely the understanding of being in the sense of presence at hand in the broadest signification. Wow. If anybody knows anything, if anybody thinks they've understood this paragraph, they should come. If not, I'm just going to go on reading it until Tyler's got more to say about this than...
Before where he distinguishes, I think that's right, that's where he makes the difference. He distinguishes the condition of possibility. One way of parsing that paragraph is doing ontology. We're going to account for ontology as one doing ontology.
Yeah, I don't want to say that. I mean, I don't know what to say, but that somebody could say that. The Heidegger in Being in Time. Here, okay. I was thinking of the one in Being in Time, where he gets to ontology straight from the understanding of being to ontology, the one I read earlier on. Okay, I'm sorry, I just got sidetracked. What's he doing here? Okay.
He temporarily stays to account for his privilege to understand. Well, I don't think that's what he literally.
I don't think so. Right.
Then simply things that two possible things.
Exactly, cite as temporality with a small t. Keep everybody.
Every single point, there are two things left there. The one who talks about that how would be for decentralizing term. So he's told the whole story. Then on the basis there's something upon which project and say the thing doesn't.
Well, that's nice if we can make that work. Okay.
And I think, and that's sort of what you're doing with the growing schema here. That there's something, but that Bentley doesn't capture the
Okay. That's one line. Tell us another line.
So we left out the upon which, but also it's as if Dasein is the open, and Dasein is projecting a possible. But is it, he really wants to say there's a further condition of possibility of Dasein is like the thing, which has to be given to it. Probably it's the good way of things. It's that which is not Dasein.
The condition of the possibility of Dasein's temporality, namely that it has something to project upon. Okay, that's the first one.
He certainly has to go. And he's also saying that there's a condition of possibility of Zeitlichkeit. That's metaphorically light. That only because there's something like light, not the sort of light we can provide ourselves, not object light, but really there's something we must think. The two possibilities are, or actually something with the condition of possibility.
Well, it's beyond being the good, as he says. Yeah, and it's like the illumination in the room, this light. It's the clearing. It's the light which withdraws and lets us makes everything intelligible. And why he needs that, which is all when he hasn't already got it. But I think I see what you mean. That it's something from outside the practices of Dasein has to provide this illumination in which even the practices, even the coping which makes us understand being, can only take place in it. I see that that's the structure of what he's saying, as a possible structure. Well, okay, I mean, Eugene wants to say something about this, I see. Yes. 274? Okay, let's go to 274. Against the light version. Okay, temporality is the condition of the, where you, okay, by the way, you have the German, where it says temporality in the sentence I just looked at, is the condition of the possibility of Dasein's being, that's Zeitlichkeit. That's right, he puts the German in, so then I believe him. So didn't you just read that as if it was temporality, or did I mishear you? Yeah, what did you read what you said on 274?
First on the end of the 19, in its role as condition.
Ah, okay, wait, I get to get there. Its role as the condition? Yeah. So then that's interesting, isn't it? That just says it's the same thing, but we're giving it a new name because we're giving it a new function, or we're calling attention to a particular function, which in fact we've already described. And we've described a function. Now we're going to tell you a name for something when it's performing that function. That, boy, does that make it a lot simpler.
When temporality functions.
Really? Yeah. So all this that we've been reading about, the way temporality with a small t structures the understanding of being, is temporality. We're just going to call why we shouldn't do. That just makes this is making Tyler go crazy. Okay, why not? Yes. But they aren't two different things. This passage says. This passage says it's one thing with two different functions. Yeah, and which opens a clearing in which we can encounter entities.
Still, our understanding, but it's also a further.
Go ahead, Eugene. Yeah.
If they are the same.
Well, we could just be naming them from a point of view of their function. One of them opens up a clearing and makes intentionality possible. That's one function of this. I'm going to call it familiarity stuff. And the other, that the familiarity stuff is what makes ontology possible, because it's, as you guys kept insisting, has a structure which we can spell out in a science of being. And then and when we're treating it as something whose structure we can spell out in an ontology, we're going to call it temporality. That's how Eugene is reading it, I think. And it seems like that's what he's saying, but it seems like such a perverse and useless thing to say, to introduce a whole fancy new terminology just to describe a different function that you've been describing already, only you haven't given it this name. Yeah. Well, I see that if you bring in light, it's not going to be that we're just renaming things. But he looks as if he just says the role of condition of the possibility of the understanding of being, both pre-ontological and ontological, we will call temporality. And then we've been just discussing that role, and we discussed it fine in Being and Time on page 119 without ever having to bring in this technical term. And that's weird. But so anybody else who wants to join in, yeah, go ahead. Wait, where are you? 302. Because I don't understand what you're saying, but that's probably because I'm not on 302. Okay, let's go to 302. Now tell us where you are. Of temporality, and there we haven't even gotten to temporality. That is not a capital T yet. Okay, well then what do you add? Why is he adding this?
Well,
Are you saying that we need to explain how come that all these horizons, all these ecstasies have horizons, and that we sort of need another something or other to explain that? That would be an interesting move. Is that what you were saying already? That seems to be a new possibility. Well, under a new something. We don't want to call it a new horizon, or he warns that we go into a regress if we do that. But it's some new something or other, which we call temporality. But does he ever say that he wants to do that? I don't remember. What? He's certainly not in Being and Time. In Being and Time, he just says, every ecstasy is a removal. It must be a removal to something. Whatever it's a removal to, we're going to call that the horizon, and no problem. And now all of a sudden he's got a problem, how to get the ecstasies together with the horizons. Well, he's got another 2 years. He could get a new problem, but I don't see it yet.
We define that unity as there's some aspects of the world which allow
between the ecstasies and the horizon. Where's the quote? That's so interesting. I mean, if that were true, that would certainly be helpful. Where do you get that?
When you say that's not. It's present. That's not the temporality. You see what he's saying along with something. I don't know if I can make it.
That's when I think I got desperate for affordances, that there's something out there that is soliciting me, or Dasein. Dasein is coping with something. It's got an ecstatic structure that enables it to encounter things and cope with them. But things have this other aspect, namely they solicit us to deal with them and cope with them. And that's what temporality tells us, is how it fills in the horizon in some phenomenological way as not a projection, but a response to a solicitation. That would be turning him into Merleau-Ponty. I would like that. But I don't know if there's any, and I have down here sort of passages which I think might be read that way. But I see what you're saying. Well, I have an idea about how to deal with that as a problem. So let me stop there, and I'll try to put in some text. But first, I thought I saw another person who wanted to discuss it. No? Okay, well then we'll go on. I have to see where I am. So we're at the bottom of 302 with that complicated worry about what's going to explain what. So you think, I gather, tell me your first name again. Okay, Alex. You think, Alex, that the sentence that comes close to saying what you just said is 5 lines from the bottom of 302. It must now be shown explicitly how the understanding of the readiness to hand is as such a world understanding, and how this world understanding, as Dasein's transcendence, is rooted in the ecstatic horizontal constitution of Dasein's temporality. But it seems, it doesn't seem that he thinks there's any problem. It's as if he thinks that he just has to do what he's done already in Being in Time and in here. What's he going to show? That the world Dasein?
The temporalizes everyday person, like everyday work. Then he knows how you know that together.
Wait, temporality in Being. What 2 different modes of temporal? Oh, yeah, authentic and inauthentic.
Conscious multiplicity of ways in which show up. Now you have to tell us how they affect.
Go ahead, Eugene. I can see you want to say something. Well, Alex, go ahead.
That's being intertemporal. You are already.
Well, stop. I'm lost. I can't find you. We're on the bottom of 305. Where at the bottom of 305? When we describe the handy, that's starting there. Okay, now go ahead. Well, let's read it. Start over now.
The origin of being our handiness. This anesthetic understanding.
And présence is a dimension of temporality, and it's going to make something intelligible. You're on an important track. What are we going to make it? We understand the handy as a mode of being of handiness. This antecedent understanding of the handiness of the handy is we get thanks to temporality. The understanding of the handiness. So weird. I mean, we've understood that since back in the beginning of being in time. It's practically the first thing in being in time tells us that what we encounter most of the time is the handiness of the handy. Maybe it's understanding the handiness of the handy as a way of being. I'm just trying to desperately generate a problem. Yes, you got to generate a problem? No, go ahead. What are you going to do? Does he?
It doesn't go. We need to understand that there's a temporal problem of the transcendence of the world. Here's the temporal.
I mean, he didn't hear you well enough. Say it again. I just didn't. No, he looks like he thinks he solved it in Division 2. Yeah.
So that's again the thing.
I don't see where you are, but I'm happy with it. 303, did you say? 302, the second sentence. The ecstatic character, let's see, oh, I see. Oh, I got it now. Okay, the most original temporality makes possible the understanding of being. The most original temporalizing of temporality as such is, it's like the same redefining again. It's saying that that aspect of temporalizing, which we've already discussed, we're now going to focus on that aspect, and then we're going to call it temporality. Yeah, that's right. And it's calling it, giving it a new name because now we're interested in its what?
How it does that.
How it does it. Okay. Yeah, Alex again. Whoa. Doesn't say it to me. Where do you see the... Okay, where on 305? Okay.
Or temporality, not that.
I never found that sentence. Tell me again where it is. I see. Way down. Okay, just a second now. The now is... Yeah, but that's a way off different issue. I mean, that tells you how wrong all the traditional people have been. Period. Yeah, but he's got to be doing more than answering the tradition, because that got answered in Being in Time already. I mean, that we aren't going to have any supra-temporal and now theory doing the job of explaining worldhood. What? And he's just giving it a new name. I think that's what we're converging. Well, I see. Tyler, we can't. So why not, Tyler? I don't know what to think. I'll say I'm neutral. What's that? It's a name for primordial temporality under the description of basis for ontology. Something.
We do not allow ourselves to blaspheme. We call that primordial time because they're both important about how one is just different. Whenever we hear formulations, temporality is primordial designate. It's saying they're both temporal phenomena, because if they were the same, then it's silly to do. So we obviously must have to read all those formulas.
Okay, well then we have to understand what we've added. So either, okay, yeah, well that does seem like he might be doing that, yeah.
What are the conditions of possibility of projection?
It would be nice, I'm just bringing in my desire to find phenomena that I can already understand, if he was saying both that we need to understand sort of how the world solicits us to make our projections. That would be the solicitation story, and the light would be something like the holistic bunch of all the affordances. I mean, there would be two things. We need to understand how existential particular things solicit us to cope with them. And we need to understand how there is some holistic background in which all these particular ones are intelligible. That's the light. Is that sort of the structure you would like? Yeah, but I want some content for the light. That's what I'm struggling for. I want to know what phenomenon it is. It isn't Plato. We agree. Well, yeah. That is what? It's the clearing in that there. And the clearing seems to be the same as the light. So is that what you mean? It has the horizons, and it's the background, the sort of intelligibility. That's I wrote in my margin, where is it, where it sounded just like the clearing when he talked about the light, and he calls it, where's the light talk at Plato talk? When he finally sort of transforms Plato into his own story. Somebody must be able to find it. It goes on for several pages. I lost it completely. You got it? What? 282. Is that where he gets to Plato at the... Oh, here it is, 281. For I, near the top, 5 lines down, for I can comport towards beings only if those beings can themselves be encountered in the brightness of the understanding of being. This is the necessary condition. In terms of fundamental ontology, it can be expressed by saying that all understanding is essentially related to an affective self-finding which belongs to the understanding itself. It's funny, it goes off into talking about mood and stuff at that point, which is not, is that what you think is okay for what you want to say? Okay, no sense is needed to make clear how immediately in our attempt to get beyond being to the light from which and in which it itself comes into the brightness of an understanding we are moving is one of Plato's fundamental problems. I'm going to give a wild interpretation of this, which I mean, don't all throw things at me. But I mean, there is one issue which he could be worrying about. I'm going to try to spell this out, which has not been faced at all. And that is, well, how are we conscious of all this? Of course, he's not going to be able to say that. That's consciousness doesn't show up in the book at all, except in one of the last sentences of Being in Time, in which he says we ought to talk about it sometime. But so he's not going to say how are we going to become conscious of all this, but that's got to do with the illumination. It's sort of, what is it? Let's try next. Well, how do we become aware of all this? Well, that's getting closer. If you're not aware of the equipment and aware of the present at hand stuff and aware of the affordances, you're nowhere. And he hasn't talked about it because he wants to stay out of that. That's falling back into Descartes. So it's not awareness. So let's back a little safer. Maybe he's talking about the way you have to take account of the door. Remember, I talked about this a lot earlier. As you do the two go out, even though you don't have to notice the door, be aware of the door, be conscious of the door, nonetheless, the door had better be maybe illuminated for you. I mean, you can't go out the door if in some sense you haven't picked it up in its intelligibility as the two go out. So I copied my favorite sentence in here. What is first of all given, and he says every once in a while that he's talking about what is antecedently there. So what is first of all given is the fore-writing, going in and out, fore-sitting. This writing, going in and out, sitting and the like is what we are a priori involved with, what we know when we know our way around. Maybe this is a story of the way we are taking account of all the stuff he's been writing about as we know our way around in the world, and he can't call it consciousness or awareness or noticing, so he'll call it the way our illumination, the way our activity is illuminated. Does that make you, how do you feel about it? Is that what Being in Time says? I don't know. I don't find it in Being. Yes, I think it is, except that it is and it isn't. It manages to talk about all the time somehow they're showing up, but it doesn't really talk about what it is for them to show up or something like that. It just, and now I guess I'm not sure he's talked about it now, given it a new name, illumination and so forth, but it looks like, I mean, I'm just trying to say, the only thing I can think of that he hasn't talked about already in Being in Time explicitly, even in a formal way, is the fact that we are in some way or another aware or taking account of all this. How does it show up in Being in Time? What language is it? Minus. I doubt it. I think minus is more on the side of authenticity, and it has to do with my calling. This is a different comment. Well, yeah, I think this is, some of you are going to find this a little off the beam for a minute, but I think everybody's got a calling, even when they're not listening to the calling of their silent conscience, letting the one drown it out. So I think minus is way over in that sort of existentialist thing. I don't think it's mine. It seems odd to think that it's minus, just that I'm taking account of the door as I respond to the two go out. It doesn't seem very mine to the two go out. Anybody's two go out. It could be a very Das Man to go out. So I want something like how it is that we are taking account of all this, how it is that these things are showing up. But I must say, I don't see that temporality really contributes anything to how things are showing up, except name it, or the illumination maybe names it. Alex again. Yeah. Yes.
Seems like you said here, I thought of that to be familiar, there's some a priori, and how do we even come to be familiar?
It worries me only that I don't see that it's explaining anything. It just seems to be naming something. But he thinks, so we got to be careful. I mean, he thinks that he's doing something besides just rename familiarity. He thinks he's explaining something about familiarity which he hasn't explained before. And well, I can only say one more thing. I mean, the two things it seems to me he hasn't explained, but I'm not sure I can map them onto what he's worrying about, is the holism of all these practices, how they all hang together in one unified world that we can find our way around in, instead of just coping with hammers over here and with people in the classroom, you know. And so there's some unified phenomenon called world, and I don't know if he thinks that he's going to tell us a story about that. Yeah. No, not yet. I want to go on. What? Wait, the two. And the other one is, again, I think that he's put something like the awareness of it, as we find our way around in the world. We're responding to go in and out and so forth. And there must be some way that we're, I hate to say it, experiencing them, and that he wants to do something. But I don't understand, I'm afraid, how the temporality tape story does something for either. Jason, yeah.
Your question was something else entirely, namely historicality.
It's through history our practices have become more and more interdefined and unified. Possibly that would be a Hegel-like move. But that's an epistemological question. That doesn't interest. Well, it's not how do we account for it. How does it show up for us? What is it for it to show up for us? And that's one. And what is it to be integrated in a referential whole? I mean, of significance. I've got quotes about this where it looks like the Zeitlichkeit has something to do with the significance story. But anyway, you want to say something, and then I'll get back to my quotes. Dasein in its unity, but how about the world in its unity? The world that I'm finding my way around in, which he talks about. Yeah, but somehow the unity of Dasein, namely what it gets when it's authentic, it seems that you can't get out of that the way all these practices hang together so that I can find my way around in the world. Oh, that unity, yes, self and world get you. When he's got it the way yes, he says self and world are just two aspects of the phenomena being in the world, and we are the world existingly story. We did all that. We did it without asking just how we are aware of. I'm trying to put in there. I mean, we are the world existingly, yes, that is. And what does that mean? It means at least this, that we are defined by a for the sake of which, and the practices all end up in a for the sake of which, and it's the same for the sake of which, we've gone through it, and therefore it's unified. That's fine. But I still think you need a kind of question, yeah, but how come all the particular practices add up to one world of significance? Where did that come from? That doesn't seem to follow from the fact that there's a bunch of for the sake of whiches out here, so to speak, and a bunch of Daseins taking stands on their being. How come that meshes like that? The temporality Tate answers that as I doubt. I mean, I don't know. I don't see how it answers it. If anything, maybe names it. I saw a hand over here. Did I? On the periphery? Okay, Jason. I think the practices are the world. I mean, when you find your way around in the world, you find your way in not just practices, in a coherent, interrelated stuff of practices, equipment, other people, roles defined by the one. All that goes to make up the phenomenon of world.
But I'm not sure how to.
Well, I think I see what you mean. Maybe it's more what I said to Eugene is appropriate. Not that the practices are all unified, because maybe they aren't. Maybe there are practices of the bikers which just aren't unified with the practices of the Christians or something. So, but maybe the right thing is to say we want to understand better how self and world are unified, and why it should be obvious that there's a for the sake of which for every Dasein, and in order to for all the streams of equipment, and the streams of equipment and the Daseins all get connected in a way that works. That I'm not sure what to make of that, because I don't think he's got an answer to that, if that is a real question even. Yeah. Well, I did. I mean, I sort of accepted it without saying clearly enough that I accepted it. Yeah, that's when I said, maybe the bikers and the Christians aren't really unified, but a lot of the Sittlichkeit, the customs that have come down to us, have gotten more and more integrated. I call that the Hegelian sort of thing. So so when you ask sort of how come all the practices don't get in the way of each other, you can tell a historical, sociological, das Mann story, pragmatic. So then, but I stick to the other thing. I mean, I think he's got a problem of how he just neatly made self and world connect. But I don't know. Let me take time, because I'm going to be unhappy if time runs out. I have quotes that sort of go in the direction I'm trying to go, so I want to at least read them, and then we can see if they do or don't work. So let me find out where I am. So we are all agreeing that temporality grounds familiarity, which grounds the understanding of being. Are we, in spite of those weird sentences in which it isn't clear how they all relate? Temporality is that on the basis of which there is familiarity, and on the basis of familiarity we encounter the various ways of being. Never mind. I mean, that's regressing into our discussion. I want to go where I am now. So we got to Präsenz on 309. This is in the actual reading, so everybody should feel at home now. This is the stuff that you supposedly at least tried to understand. Well, here's an interesting one. Under light of our discussion, it now seems to me to mean something different than I would have thought. Namely, what's happening with this? Is it still recording what we're talking about? It looks like it is. Yeah. Okay. At the top of 309, I now think this isn't what I thought it was. I thought it was, well, let's read it and see what it is. The handiness of the handy, the being of this kind of beings, is understood as Präsenz. Präsenz, which, as non-conceptually understandable, is already unveiled in the self-projection of temporality by means of those temporalizing anything like existent, by means of whose temporalizing anything like existent commerce with entities handy in extent becomes possible. So that, I mean, I marked that, I guess, because I couldn't tell whether that Präsenz is part of temporality, right? So it looks like now he could be contributing something new there, but I haven't understood it there yet, because I don't see what's being added. So I was going on trying to find out. It seems like what makes our openness to familiarity possible, I said. Let's see if we can answer that. What could that be? Yeah, well, here I am going off into this thing which I already did, but I hope maybe I've got pages now. Then I said, we're awareness of our things. We're going to describe the passage which I thought I sort of understood something was 309. And it looked like for a while there was a phenomena he was talking about 2/3 of the way down. And it was when he says he's going to talk about presence and absence and affordances, I think, something like affordances. So on page 309, in the second paragraph, about 50 lines down, we do not always and continually have explicit perception of the things surrounding us in a familiar environment. See, that got me off thinking, gee, he understands that we sometimes have explicit perception of the things in our environment. That sounds like Merleau-Ponty more than Heidegger, even mentioning that we perceive the things. And then he says, going on, certainly not in such a way that we would be aware of them expressly as handy. So now we're going to talk about awareness. And we're going to say, well, we're aware of handy things, of ready-to-hand things, but of course we're not explicitly perceiving them, that is, noticing them, nor are we aware of them as handy. That's this business of the two go out. You don't have to notice the door. You don't have to be aware that it's functioning equipment. It is precisely because an explicit awareness and assurance of their being at hand does not occur that we have them around us in a peculiar way, just as they are in themselves. Well, that's good. I mean, that's just to say that we've got them around us and we cope with them and we take account of them, but we don't have to be explicitly aware of them. In the indifferent imperturbableness of our customary commerce with them, they become accessible precisely with regard to their unobtrusive presence. Well, all of that is already in being in time, but it looks like he's coming back to this issue, and it looks like it is a kind of story about how we, I want to say in some minimal way, take account of the things that we cope with. The presupposition for the possibility of the possible equanimity of our dealing with things is, among others, the uninterrupted quality of the commerce. It must not be held up in progress. That's fine. In Dewey language, he's talking about ongoing coping. It's amazing how similar they are at that point. At the basis of this undisturbed imperturbability of our commerce with things, there lies a peculiar temporality. Well, now we're going to see if we can get Zeitlichkeit in here. A peculiar temporality which makes it possible to take a handy equipmental context here in such a way that we lose ourselves in it. So he said already in Being in Time that we, when we're coping, are absorbed and lose ourselves in the hammering or whatever. Now he says that, I don't know whether it really answers anything, but there's a peculiar temporality, a peculiar dimension of temporality, which is what makes it possible for us to lose ourselves in things when we cope with them. At least there's a phenomenon there. I don't understand what he's doing but naming it, but he's got something there. So let's go on. The temporality of dealing with equipment is primarily and presenting. But according to what was previously said, there belongs to it a specific presential constitution of the horizon of the present. So we're in the horizon business. This is all sort of as near Merleau-Ponty as Heidegger's ever going to get. So we're the constitution of the horizon of the present, on the basis of which the specific presence of the handy, in distinction, say, from the merely present at hand, becomes antecedently intelligible. There's the antecedently. I mean, so what is first of all given is us immersing ourselves in going out the door. I think that's the bottom line, and maybe it's more bottom, maybe, than anything he says in Being in Time. The undisturbed character of imperturbable commerce with the handy becomes visible as such if we contrast it with the disturbed quality and so forth. Well, that's it. So has he added anything to Being in Time? Has he told us that at least that that we have to explain absorption and ongoing coping, and it's a capacity we've got, and we're going to call it présence. And we're going to focus on it because it's a capacity we've got that lets us take account of the horizon, what the horizon removes itself to. So we now get to take account of and get absorbed in the ready to hand. That's présence. That's a part of temporality. Is that? I mean, I don't think I'm making it up. I'm just not sure that it's getting us anywhere that we weren't already. I'm going to just finish. I've almost got to where So there's one more move, just as long as I got them all. There's another thing that he's going to add here that I don't think he ever added, which is how it is that we deal with things that are absent, equipment that is absent. He says we experience it as absent, it gets in the way and all that. But then he starts asking on 311 about the phenomenon of absence. That is, there has to be some kind of expectation for something to be experienced as absent, and that is, in italics, the top of 311, a specifically modified horizon of the presence, of présence. And what it seems to be, it's a special horizon called absence, now all spelled funny. And I think that is, and then skipping a little, if circumspection, letting function, were not from the very outset an expectance, and if this expectance did not temporalize itself as an ecstasis, in ecstatical unity with impresenting itself as a pertinent horizontal schema, if that weren't all there, antecedently unveiled, first of all given in the ecstatic unity, If Dasein, that couldn't happen if Dasein were not a temporal Dasein in the original sense, and so forth. So I think all that means is that we have a kind of readiness, along with the fact that things solicit us and let us become absorbed in them. That's one of the things that happens that he's talking about. When the things aren't there that we are ready to deal with and become absorbed in, then we have a kind of readiness, and he's never talked about that. A kind of readiness which is our relation to something absent which we were expecting would be present, to account for something experienced as missing. And maybe, what I'm happy about is at least I think I see the phenomenon is near the surface for a change. Now, if we can just relate those phenomena to what temporality is supposed to enable us to understand that we haven't understood before, we'd be in good shape. Did anybody want? Yeah. Okay, Alex.
Before us.
Okay, sounds plausible. That's what I'm saying too. It's missing, and how could it be missing unless we had a readiness and expectance, as he calls it, to use it, and that's somehow going to be called, par essence, that's a dimension of primordial temporality, which he hasn't talked about in Being and Time. That's all I can say about it, and you better have it. And if you have a notion of presence and absence, these two funny words, then you have a way of explaining of the use of the ready to hand, which he hadn't explained in Being and Time, and so that there's some excuse for giving them a new name. At least they're new phenomena that he's introducing, and he's claiming, and this is, I don't find it very explanatory, but he's claiming that some, what are you going to call it? I don't want to say structure after all the trouble I went to get rid of structure. Some aspect of Dasein's coping capacity is something like that, is what he's interested in. And presence allows him to describe aspects. It's a rich phenomena, remember, he says. So why doesn't it include readiness, for instance, and solicitation, and significance, which is how they're all interrelated? All of that has to go into our finding something either ready to hand or missing. He just produces missing in Being and Time. He doesn't say, well, how can Dasein cope? How can Dasein experience missing? I find myself talking in awareness and experience terms, but I think it's all right. Okay. Now, you want to say something, right? Really? I was trying to do, I see. Well, I guess I want to put presence on the side of world. That's the affordance side. That's definitely on the side of world, but I do want to put readiness on the side, the absence part on the side of God. Mm-hmm. A real alteration in the way the world shows up. Yes, that's good. That's good. That's good. The world looks like it lacks something. That's in the look of the world. How about I'll meet you halfway. How about a correlation between that and our activity? Because we have to have a readiness or the world isn't going to look different. I was ready to, I got to switch to Sartre. How many know the famous Sartre stuff about Pierre in the cafe? Anybody? He obviously got it from Heidegger. I don't know, he didn't read this, so maybe he got it from the phenomena. But anyway, once you're looking for Pierre in the cafe, then now in my terms, you've got this readiness to see Pierre, and he isn't there. And now everything looks different. The cafe looks like it lacks Pierre. And it looks like it takes both. It takes something on from the side of the world, namely the world without him, and it takes something on the side of us, namely readiness to see him. And that's all right. I think it's enough if Heidegger keeps, the world side in there and doesn't reduce it to the readiness, which I almost did. What was the other thing? Oh, yeah, and the two go in and out and so forth. That's certainly on the side of the world. And if I'm and if I'm dealing with things as to go out, then he has to have a story about how I can do that without, now let me think of it. I'm projecting going out. I'm trying to think of the parallel. I'm projecting going out, and that amounts to respond, and the world then shows up as to go out, and I respond to the two go out. I mean, if I'm not projecting going out, then the door doesn't show up as the two go out. But I can project all I want of two going out, and if there isn't any door, then there won't be any experience of anything affording going out. You got to have both again. So I would like to think that presence, and thereby as an example of temporality, is an example of the phenomenon that he wants to get at as the basic way Dasein, in coping, Dasein is the world existingly. It has a lot of structure, and he's trying to tell us. The question is, how does that relate to what he says about the temporality as the sort of more fundamental phenomenon than temporality? It is more fundamental, but in a kind of phenomenological way which might not be appropriate for this very abstract discussion. I don't know. Tyler probably thinks it's not. What? I know we're at the extremes of formal and phenomenal now. Okay.
It's formal. On the basis we go in the line over it, and then you can get some of the sides later. There's no guarantee that.
Well, why? I mean, that's interesting. But why leave it formal? I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with it being formal, but then, and maybe that's all he's saying in here. But I mean, once you got the form, I think you're saying somehow we can't fill it in. The phenomenon couldn't live up to what the form is asking it to be. And I want to say, sure, we can fill it in. I just filled it in, why not? But you might be right. He isn't filling it in. I'm putting it in, and with something wrong with what I filled it in, with something that has too objectified it or conceptualized it or something. I'm trying to see if I get used to it, and it's okay with me.
I'm part of the world, and don't say that it's kind of Dasein's practice.
Okay, I agree, and I think, I mean, and that I would say is the minimal, at least this much. In a formal way, Heidegger is trying to fight his way out of idealism, namely grounding it in temporality with a small t, which is a structure of Dasein's activity. And he's trying to explain why or how or that. I guess maybe that there is always a horizon tied up with every activity. He needs that he's got this phenomenon of something being missing. Once you've gone that far toward the phenomenon, it seems to me you ought to be allowed to go on and give the phenomenon that makes something missing, that makes it possible to experience something that's missing. But anyway, certainly the formal thing is in there, and I'm glad. And I want to fill in the phenomenon because if there is such a formal something or other, then either, but this is what I just realized listening to Tyler. I mean, there are two possibilities again. Either Heidegger just isn't telling us, because it's not his business to write the phenomenology of perception and so forth, or it's something we can't think and conceptualize and point to. I think that's more what you think. And that would be something like the way the time-free movements of nature can only show up for us in the clock and already counted as nows. And that you can't talk about or think about or make intelligible the time-free movements of nature. They are unintelligible, Heidegger says. They just have to be there to get to mesh with our concerns in order for there to be a clock, in order that we can count the nows. And maybe here again, we're going to say something like, well, you can't really talk about what it is about Dasein that makes it able to experience something that's missing, which I call readiness. That's too psychological and too much cognitive science. We don't know about that. But there has to be something that Dasein is open to when something is missing. And we can't say anything more about how Dasein has that openness. That's what you think. And that might be true. That's fine. And then, and the other one was what? The affordances. Again, maybe that's who existentiel. After all, we want to stay on the level, if we want to stay on the level of world, that's not what we can do, but we shouldn't stay on the level of world. This present story is on the level of coping with particular equipment, it seems to me. And if it is, then you want to know how that particular equipment manifests itself to Dasein or something like that. Then I want to talk about solicitation. But then I want to say, well, Heidegger, instead of saying Heidegger says you can't talk about it, Heidegger's just not, is not in the business of talking about it. He's not going to give a cognitivist account of the existential fact that, what now? That there is, on the side of the world, if I don't say solicitations, what do I say? It's all right? Okay, then there is on the side of the world affordances. That's fine with me. Okay, it's just time to stop, unless somebody has some amazing thing to say that will make all this illuminating more than it is already. I think we will.